Hello, everybody, and welcome to the wild side of STEAM, where we explore unusual careers in science, technology, engineering, art, and math at the Smithsonian's National Zoo. My name is Shelley. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'll be your host for today. In a couple minutes, we will meet our guests and hear all about our unusual zoo job, and that's a population biologist. While we wait for more friends to join, you're going to see a quick poll pop up on your screen. Do you know what a population biologist is? Yes or no? So while you take a minute to submit your answers to that, I'm going to go over the format of our webinar today. It is live captioned. You'll want to locate that CC button at the bottom of your screen for those to appear. Our program is about 30 minutes with an additional 15 minutes at the end to answer as many questions as we can. Remember, this is a webinar, so we cannot see or hear you. And you cannot see or hear each other. You can, however, interact with us in a number of ways. You already saw that we will be launching some polls throughout our program today. Additionally, you will see that the Q&A is open as well. So please submit your questions at any time, and we will again try to answer as many as we can at the end. Lastly, you will see that the chat feature is also available for you to message us as well. Now, right now, I want you to find that chat feature, and I want you to type in there your name and where you are joining us from. While you do that and put your answers in the chat, I want to introduce my team who's helping me behind the scenes. We have Erica, Kaden, and Jess helping to answer your questions. If you feel the need, you can jump on and give a wave. That's so great. All right, I see Billy is here. I see the Dailies from Providence, Rhode Island, Mark from North Carolina. That's so great. Oh, Dylan, wonderful. So many great people joining us from all over the country. That's incredible. All right. And Clara and Rosalind, Grand Junction, Colorado. Wow, we are really spreading the US, and we have someone, Will, from Boston. Amazing. All right. Oh, we have someone joining us from all the way from Panama. Wow. And Silver Spring. All right, pretty local. Great, Christina. All right, so once again, everybody, welcome to the wild side of STEAM. I am so thrilled to be joined by Kate Rodriguez-Clark, a population biologist at the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. Hi, Kate, and welcome.
Hi, Shelley. My name's Kate, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for joining us today. What do you do for the zoo?
So I do population management, and I also do research on how to make population management better. I also do other kinds of more ecologically focused research, but today I'm going to focus on the population management part.
All right, so let's break it down a little bit. What are we talking about when you say population management? What kinds of populations are we talking about?
Right. When we talk about populations, we're talking about a number of different animals in one species living in a particular area. So this could be a set of naked mole rat colonies in the wild in Kenya, or it could be the population, all of the naked mole rats living in zoos in the United States. Today, we're going to be talking mostly about zoo populations of animals. And the management part of the population is manipulating where these animals are and how they interact with each other to achieve population goals.
Wonderful. So what sorts of goals would we have for a population?
Right. Okay. One common goal is growing the population to a target size if you want to have a certain number of individuals in the population. But there are plenty of other goals, right? You could also have the goal of holding the size of the population steady, or you might want to produce extra individuals for reintroduction into the wild. To have animals in zoos to save species, we can't always just take them from the wild, right? Because that would put wild populations in danger. So instead, we produce them from other animals that are already in zoos. But most individual zoos can't do this alone, right? Most have only a few individuals of a given species, and they might be related to each other. So maintaining populations requires a lot of cooperation across a lot of institutions.
So you're working with a lot of other zoos in order to reach these population goals for a species.
Yeah, exactly. Typically, we'll have someone called a stud bookkeeper who keeps a record of the family tree of all the animals in a particular species all across North America. And that includes also all the dates of all the important events in each animal's life. So when it was born, when it moved from one place to another place, and when it died. Um, and then that stud bookkeeper then often teams up with someone called a species coordinator to keep in touch with all of the institutions that hold that species and make plans together. So my role is I work with the species coordinators and the stud bookkeepers to analyze the family trees and these important dates for all the animals in a species. And together we help decide which animal should move where and who should reproduce with who to produce the next generation and to keep the population healthy. And we use a number of different computer systems and programs to do these analyses. So sometimes people have jokingly called this computer dating for animals.
What a fun job title. So I imagine it's not as simple as just pairing a male and a female together and, or a male clouded leopard and a female clouded leopard and hoping that they make babies, right?
Yeah, for some species it can be easier and others it is more complicated, but there are always a set of factors that we consider, right? So one of the factors, if the species that we're working with has has different sexes, of course we consider sex. And if we often consider their age as well, because male-female pairs that share similar ages are often more successful than pairs that have very different ages. We also often consider how many relatives each animal already has in the population. So if it has a lot of relatives, we can say that it's overrepresented. And it might be a little bit of a lower priority to breed, but if it has very few other relatives, we say that it's underrepresented and it might have a higher priority. And we use a special number to summarize how many relatives an animal has in the population, and that's called that animal's mean kinship. That's the average relatedness it is to everyone else. Another thing that we often consider is how close the mean kinship of each animal in the pair is, because it's better for the overall population if each member of the match has a similar mean kinship. So if one has a low mean kinship, we want the other one to have a low mean kinship too. There are other factors that we consider as well, but those are just 4 examples of the top considerations.
That's great. So it sounds like as far as our STEAM goes, you're really using quite a bit of math as well to really identify what would make good pairs in these animals to ensure we're having a healthy genetic population in our zoos. That's great. So we are actually going to get the opportunity to run through an example of some animals that you've worked with pairing. And audience, this is going to be another chance for you to weigh in. Would you rather hear Kate talk about how she's paired matched Persian onagers or Malayan tapirs? So you'll see that poll right now. And we have a picture of both of those animals. If you've never heard of those, they are quite fascinating. We do have Persian onagers at our facility in Front Royal, and that's the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. Again, and I'll give you another minute to fill out this poll. And while I give you that minute, just a reminder that the Q&A is open if you have any questions so far. All right, I see those answers coming in. Give you another few seconds. All right, and it looks like the Malayan tapirs won. All right, so we're gonna run through an example of what you've looked at, Kate, for matching Malayan tapirs. So we'll get some charts up. Wonderful. All right. What are we looking at here, Kate?
Okay, so I wanna let everyone know these aren't exactly the data for the population size is the exact data for Malayan tapirs, but the chart that's up is just an example because of course all of the data that are involved belongs to all of the institutions that cooperate, and we want to respect the spirit of keeping their data for the scientific use. And so we've made up some data here, but what you can see in the graph is, so on the vertical axis is the number of individuals, and on the horizontal axis is the year. And what you can see is that the population started at a low size and it grew to a larger size. So right now, the very end, we're at about 50 individual tapirs that are in this population. And the two colored lines that are below there, that indicates the number of males and females. And you can see it's about evenly split. In recent years, we've had a few more females than males, right? Because the red line is above the blue line. And then this other graph shows across the top in pink are the females, and they're their numbers. Female number 101, for example, from New York, and female 205 from Washington, D.C. And on the vertical, they're the males in blue, and so you can see there are a number of different numbers of those. And what the numbers in the middle are their MSI numbers. Those are their mate suitability index, and that is an index number that combines all of the different factors that some of the factors that I talked about, but other ones as well. And we summarize that again using math and computers to come up with a single number to tell us how good that match is. And the green numbers are this is a good match. The yellow numbers are this is an okay match, and then the white ones are yeah, let's not think about doing that. So you can see, for example, that female 205 in DC has a good match with a number of the males, while female 101 in New York doesn't have so many good matches. And so if we only needed a couple of females to breed, we might prioritize female 205 over 101, for example.
So there was a question that we got, just to clarify, we are trying to pair the more unrelated individuals, not the closely related individuals.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's just the same as with people, right? We don't generally marry our own cousins, right?
Right.
It's exactly the same with animals.
So looking at this graph as well, what's good to know is those individuals that are yellow matches, because we talked about it's not necessarily as simple as pairing two animals together. So we could, per se, match 205, the female number 205 with the male 689. But if that's not successful, we might have to actually breed or pair together one of those ones that's a yellow matches, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so with tapirs, this isn't so much the case, but with Persian onagers, for example, they can live sometimes in herds, and there will be more than one female with a male, and you'll want to make sure that any one of those females makes a good match with that male.
That's great. And so you use charts like this to achieve, right? This is how you are making those decisions of who to pair,
Yep.
to then evaluate where you are reaching those population goals, correct?
Right. Yep. And then we also we look at, for example, if we're looking at female 205 and she's a good match with male 753, and he's already in DC, and so then if cost is a factor, we know we don't need to move him anywhere. But if she had been a good match with, say, male 284, who's all the way in California, we'd know we'd have more expense, right? Because moving a tapir all the way across the country takes some time, takes some money, and you have to be very careful with the animal.
I can imagine. That's great. So that's really fascinating, and that there's so much to consider when making these matches to create these populations.
Yeah, when we do a planning session, we generally plan a Zoom call all day long, from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
And again, this is with zoos, this is just an example, but for some species, there could be, upwards of 30 or 50 zoos that have a specific species that you're working with to
Yep.
move around and play matchmaker with.
Yes.
Wow, wow. So how does creating these healthy populations help to save species, both, in zoos and in the wild?
The basic way is that population management saves species because it's a core tool for ensuring that we have populations in captivity. It works hand in hand with the other core tools, which are things like husbandry and nutrition, enrichment, welfare, veterinary care. All of these things come together to ensure that we have healthy populations in captivity. And then once we have those, population can serve direct roles and they can also serve indirect roles. So a direct way that captive populations can help save species is providing individuals to release into the wild. And Smithsonian does this with black-footed ferrets, which are a species from the Western US, for example.
What did the Smithsonian do with black-footed parrots?
The short, so it's a complicated long story and it's
Sure.
really fascinating. The short answer is that we breed them to help grow their numbers in the wild. So you can learn all of the details about this Smithsonian's work with black-footed ferrets on the zoo's website. And one really fun thing is that we had a ferret cam up over the summer. You could see, I think Pot Pie was her name, caring for her kits. And so there are a lot of videos there. The only place that you can see them, in fact, is there. These are really special animals. You can't even see them at the zoo in DC because they're part of a program coordinated by the US Fish and Wildlife Service to restore this population in the wild. And so it's really important that these individuals don't get used to seeing people because we want them to be wild animals so that they will be able to survive when they're reintroduced. But the ferret cam will be back in the future. So you will be able to see them again there when we have our next round of kits.
That's great. So with the black-footed ferrets, we created this healthy population in zoos. And once that population is healthy enough, then we begin the reintroduction process.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that isn't the only way. So another direct way that we can save species is from complete extinction, when the species only exists in captivity. And this is a case for the Kihansi spray toad, which is a little amphibian from Tanzania, for example. But then there are indirect ways as well. So zoo populations are essential for all the research that we do that saves species, but that it's impossible to do on wild animals. And a really great example of this is all of Smithsonian's advances in panda reproduction. Because you can't do artificial insemination on a wild panda, for example. Zoos can also serve as insurance against complete extinction, and they can stand by in case a wild population disappears. So this is exactly what happened with Perry David's deer from China, for example. A long time ago, China had gifted a population of these, a small group of these deer to someone, I think in the UK, and then later the deer went extinct in China, and they were able to use the deer in captivity in the UK to save the species. So a final way that zoo populations can help save species is, of course, the way that everyone listening to this webinar can take part in, and that is by using them as educational tools to help the public, but also decision makers to learn about animals and the threats that affect them. So that they can, make better decisions and help save species.
So my next question, Devin actually was about to ask the same question I was about to ask. Is how did you learn how to do population management? How did you get into this career and discover this career?
Right. Okay, so it wasn't until actually I was in graduate school, which was in my mid-20s, because this career didn't really exist before then. When I was in middle school myself, zoos did not cooperate all that much in population management, so there wasn't really anyone doing it as a career. So even when I was in graduate school, much of the science was pretty new, and Dr. John Ballou was one of the people who was actively helping to invent it. Now, he was a population biologist at Smithsonian for many years up until his recent retirement, and I became interested in his work when I was in graduate school. So I learned about the field from him and from other people while I was studying.
That's great. It's always nice to have a mentor like that.
Oh,
Uh,
totally crucial.
so what is the coolest project you've gotten to work on? Obviously, working with animals is very exciting.
Okay. Let's see. One project I'm really excited about is called the Group Management Initiative. And that's because most of the standard population management that we use at the moment is designed for these large, easy to identify mammals like the tapirs and Persian onagers, or with our gorillas. If you have one male gorilla with one female gorilla and you get a baby gorilla, there really isn't any question who the mother and who the father is. So it's easy to gather the family histories and then to put them into our computers and do all the calculations. But many of the most endangered species in the world actually aren't like this. So they live in groups where it can be hard or even impossible to identify individuals, much less, know who their parents are. And among the most endangered groups of animals in the world are corals and amphibians, for example. And with both of those, right, it can be really hard to know who the individual tadpole is, or a little coral polyp. And in fact, there are lots of species that we know that live in herds or flocks or schools that need to be in groups to be healthy and well. And so the Group Management Initiative is a worldwide team of researchers and practitioners. And what we're aiming to do is to develop and implement science-based population management for all species that need it, not just the ones that are like gorillas. And it was really fun, actually. In October, we just had our first meeting that had 120 people from 27 countries around the world. And we're working with really cool species like Lord Howe Island stick insects, which are an endangered insect from Australia, and elkhorn coral, which is an endangered coral from Florida, from our own country.
That's a really good point that, some of, like you said, some of the most endangered species are living in these large groups or colonies. And yeah, how are you supposed to determine who is reproducing with who if they're living in such large colonies, especially?
Yeah, the flamingos that are behind me are a great example. Right now, we are trying, most of the management is individually, and we have thousands of flamingos in captivity, and it's really difficult, and they like being in these groups. So
Right, absolutely. So at the zoo, we often, myself, I've been an employee for the zoo for quite some time. We get handed these other duties that we didn't necessarily expect. So what are some of your other duties as assigned?
right. One I've been doing recently is keeping the zoo's list of geriatric animals up to date. I've been keeping that list up to date. And so these are the animals that are getting closer to the end of their natural lifespans. And they need to be on everyone's radar screens for the extra help that they might need, and for explaining to the public about what's happening with them at this phase in their life cycle. Our communication team likes to know about these older animals so that they can think in advance about how to help the public to understand when an animal passes away. And this was really important recently for Ambika, our elephant, who lived for more than 20 years beyond the median life expectancy for elephants in zoos. And this is a little bit like a person reaching more than 100 years. So having time to plan in advance allows everyone to consider how much the animal brought to her species and to science in the zoo, and to be prepared to say goodbye when the time comes. We often think about celebrating the arrival of baby animals, but we don't think about how important it is to also say goodbye at the end. And one fun thing about the geriatric list is that it gives me an excuse to read about all the species that we hold in our collection. And I love the chance to browse through them, and I always learn something new. I was actually just working on this a couple days ago and realized that the animal that has been in our collection for the longest time seems to be a pancake tortoise from East Africa, and it has been at the zoo since 1965, which means it's been with us for 55 years.
It's been here in DC at the Smithsonian's National Zoo for 55 years.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really fascinating. But you do bring up another good point, in talking about population management and what we're learning from this population in zoos with this list of geriatric animals is they tend to live a little bit longer than their wild counterparts because our zoo populations have access to readily available veterinary medicine and help with, their geriatric and have arthritis or something. We can treat that here. That's great. And we're obviously learning so much about that. So obviously here at the National Zoo, our mission is to save species, and we have a lot of conservation passions here. What is your number one conservation passion?
Right. I have a number of them, but I lived in Venezuela for a long time right before coming to the Smithsonian, and I did a lot more field-based work there. And one of the species that I had the good luck to work with was the red siskin, which is this tiny little red bird that's one of the most endangered birds in that country. And I still work with people in Venezuela to save this bird. And you can read about it at redsiskin.org, which is just the name of the bird all stuck together.org. And I am passionate about saving this species, partly, of course, because it needs population management to save it. We work with a zoo in Venezuela that receives birds that are rescued from the illegal trade, and it rehabilitates them, and it's working toward reintroducing them one day. But I'm mostly passionate about saving it because the best way we have to save this species also saves the communities that live in and near the red siskin habitat in the mountains. And these communities are working to convert fields that have been deforested into forests with shade coffee bushes in them to provide habitat for the birds, but also better livelihood for families. And they're doing this using Smithsonian bird-friendly coffee standards, and it's a great win-win solution for both the birds and the people. And so I just am so energized by working with the farmers there as well. So that's a real passion of mine.
That's wonderful. So before we move on to our Q&A, we have a ton of good questions in there. I have one last question that I have to ask all of our guests. Working in a zoo, what is your favorite animal that's at the zoo and why?
Right. So I am really lucky that I have a job that I don't have to pick. I really do truly not. I don't have a favorite animal. I do love them all. And that's one of the best things about my job. In addition to working with Persian onagers and Malayan tapirs recently, I worked with Mariana fruit doves in 2021. Hopefully I'll be working with Cory bustards and Indian bears. And I love that I don't have to choose. If we're talking about individual animals, I do have one favorite individual, and that is my dog. She's sitting at my feet right now, Nova. She makes sure I take regular breaks, and she also reminds me how important it is that when we love animals, the animals that we have in our houses need to be ones that will be happy in our houses, and that is dogs and cats and domestic animals, and not wild species. So I know we can go to zoos and sometimes feel like, oh, I want to have one of those, and having a dog is really the best way to enjoy those feelings of loving animals.
That's a great point to end on. Thank you so much, Kate. All right, we will take some questions from our Q&A. That is still open, so if you have questions that come up, continue to pop them in there. So the first question we have is, do you ever introduce new animals from the wild rather than continue breeding or pairing existing zoo animals?
Yes, and that is called translocation. And so that can happen a number of different ways. Sometimes I work with another colleague in Venezuela with Orinoco crocodiles, which is the most endangered crocodile in the world. And with crocodiles, one of the things that they have done is called head starting. They also do this with a lot of sea turtles, where they'll take wild eggs and they'll protect them for a while until they get older, and then they will release them into the wild again. So those are wild animals that you've moved from one place to another. And with large carnivores, and sometimes in the wild, if you have a large carnivore that it's a particular problem, that it's learned how to do something that's disruptive to people, often it will get captured and moved to a different location. So yeah, you can do it with wild animals too.
Great, but it's not something that we're not usually
Yeah,
seeking out wild animals to bring into the zoo.
Yeah, the zoo's specialty is captivity. And so the zoo has all of the skills to work with captive animals. So it isn't necessarily the zoo that's doing that, but in the wider world of conservation, people definitely do that.
Great. We have another question. How big of a population do we need of a species for there to be what's considered enough? How many is too few and they'll go extinct for sure?
That is such a great question. And the answer to it is that it depends. It depends on what the function of the population is. If the function of the population is for research, then it's going to depend on what's your scientific question and what sample size do you need to figure out the answer to your question. If the main function is to save something from extinction in the long term, it might be a really different answer. And so we do have some science that tells us if you are trying to save an animal from if it's gone extinct in the wild and you want to make sure that you can one day restore it to the wild, you need to have a smaller number of individuals in order to prevent the species to go extinct from inbreeding, but then a much larger to ensure that it maintains the gene diversity that it needs. And so it could be minimum 500 individuals and sometimes even more. Another species that the zoo has worked with for many years, the golden lion tamarin, in conjunction with Brazil, has more than 500 individuals in captivity and across the world, actually, to ensure that the population size is large enough. But again, for some species, having a much smaller number serves the functions fine. Yeah.
That actually, you just brought up another great question is, do you ever work with zoos in other countries? I know you said you spent some time abroad.
Yes, and just right before the pandemic, I had the great opportunity to work with colleagues in Europe, in Amsterdam, at the zoo in Amsterdam, on their planning for their freshwater teleost fish group. And so they were trying to figure out exactly this question of what size each population should be and which species they were going to have of fish all across Europe in order to fulfill all the different conservation functions that these populations have. So recently, during the pandemic, it has been all virtual, but I do get to work with colleagues around the world.
That's really great. Can you talk a little bit about if you would have done anything differently in your career, things you wish you had known getting into this career?
Oh boy. Yeah. That is a good question. I'm going to hold that one in my brain and come back to it because I want to give a good answer. And yeah, let's go back to that one at the end.
All right.
I'm thinking of a couple different things
that just came in. Are there certain animals that you get really excited to work with or match up or pair? I know you said you like to learn more when a new one comes across your desk.
Yeah, I think that it's different with each. So when you're working with something that's familiar to you, like Andean bears, for example, this will be the first time that I have planned Andean bears, but I worked with Andean bears when I was in Venezuela. And of course, working with Andean bears in the wild is very different than working with them in captivity, because in the wild, you never see them, right? I have colleagues who have worked for 20 years with Andean bears in the wild, and they've only ever seen footprints and claw scratches. And in captivity, of course, you can see them all the time. And so that's an exciting thing. But then when you work with a species that's brand new to you, it's exciting in a different way. And for example, I haven't worked with Cory bustards before, and Cory bustards are these incredible creatures that are so different than so many other birds. And so I'm excited to do that because I'm going to be learning so much. So yeah, it's hard for me to not be excited about a particular animal. I think it's just more excited in a different way for each one.
Absolutely. I know we all zoo employees just get so excited
Yeah.
about animals. So on that note, just want to make a little note about the species that we've talked about so far in this program. What is viewable? What do we have at the National Zoo and what do we not? So we do have black-footed ferrets, as Kate mentioned, at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute in Front Royal that are breeding for this reintroduction program. We do house a couple of those geriatric black-footed ferrets here at the National Zoo.
Oh, look at that. That's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so just a couple of the geriatric ones that are not suitable to be reintroduced. We have Persian onagers, as we said, at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute out in Front Royal. Those Andean bears we do have here at the National Zoo, and we have a brand new female named Brienne. You can read all about her on our website. We do have corals here as well in our Amazonia Coral Lab. And red siskins as well here. You're definitely.
We have red siskins at the Conservation Biology Institute.
So
the birdhouse is of course closed because it's being renewed.
Yes, very exciting. So we do have a new question that just came in. Do you share the genetic or population viability knowledge you learn with those biologists that are working to protect the wild populations?
Say the beginning part of that again. I didn't catch that.
Can you talk about the collaboration that you have that population biologists working in the zoos like you, are you sharing your knowledge and information with the population biologists or the biologists working with the wild populations?
Definitely. And that's something that is a growing movement. It's when you there are a growing number of organizations being led by the IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and they are leading a movement for what's called the one plan approach, and that approach suggests that for any species, we should have just one conservation plan where we coordinate and collaborate with efforts in captivity with efforts in the wild. And this meeting on the fish, for example, in Amsterdam that I went to was an example of that, where they had experts on fish in the wild as well as fish in captivity in order to think together about how can these captive populations best serve conservation. But if it's something that people who are listening to are interested in, this is brand new science. This is just in the last 3 or 4 years that the one plan approach has become really central. And so it sounds like a totally logical idea, but because people's training is different and their institutions are different, it's taken a long time to bring those worlds together, but it is happening now.
And I think that's a great point. It speaks to the ever-evolving field that is zoos and what we're doing for conservation and that, our animals' wild counterparts.
Yeah, there are some institutions in the U.S. that have been real leaders in this for a long time. Smithsonian is one, and the Bronx Zoo is another, and there are a few other, but now it's becoming sort of the norm across the entire industry.
To all have the same goal, and that's saving species. I think that's wonderful. So again, keep those questions coming as they come up.
And I want to go back to the one that I skipped over, because I really wanted to think about that. And I think the thing that I would say to myself now is, you know, I have loved animals since I was a middle schooler or younger. And I thought, like, how in the world am I going to find my place in this? And like, it seems so hard to get into. And when you go along in your journey, you come across people who tell you that you can't and that it's too difficult or that it's too hard. And I remember clearly when I was in college, I thought maybe I should be a doctor for people, and maybe I should go into medicine. And I talked to one professor, and he said, yeah, it really seems like you don't have what it takes to do research, and you should be a doctor. And I'm so glad that I didn't listen to him, that I persisted in what was really important to me. And so I would say to people who are listening here, uh, that the advice I would give to myself is to really listen, to what is going to fulfill you and give you meaning in your life, to receive good advice from the outside, but to always, if you have a passion, to pursue it.
Kate, I think that's a wonderful place to end. I don't see any other questions coming in, but that is some wonderful advice for all of our viewers. And I think probably resonates with a lot of staff here. So thank you so much. Kate, again, thank you for joining us today on the wild side of STEAM. I have learned so much about population management and population biology, and I'm sure all of our viewers did as well. If you are interested in learning more about population biology as a zoo career, we encourage you to try your hand at our Wild Side wrap-up activity. You will get the chance to play matchmaker with some of the zoo's animals, and that activity will be posted to the webinar page on the zoo's website. Before we wrap up here, you will see one more poll question pop up on your screen. Did you learn something new about zoo careers? Yes or no? If you can take a second to fill that out. Additionally, we would love your feedback on this webinar so that we can continue to learn and grow. A short survey will pop up in your web browser following the end of this program, or you can follow the link that is posted in the chat. Thank you again to everybody for joining, and thank you again to Kate for the wonderful insight. We hope
thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who's behind the scenes too. I know it takes a lot of planning to pull these things together.
We hope you will join us for our next installment of The Wild Side of STEAM on Friday, February 5th, where we will get an inside look into zoo exhibit design. Additionally, the National Zoo is partnering with the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History for their Smithsonian Science How webinar series, which is exploring animal adaptations. And next Wednesday at 1 p.m., we will be exploring clouded leopards with Juan Rodriguez out at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. On behalf of the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute, we hope you have a wild day. See you next time.